The fluorescent lights of Apex brands flickered, casting a dull glow over my cramped desk. At 38, I was the oldest junior logistics clerk the department had ever hired. I adjusted my plain gray sweater and focused on the spreadsheets. Across the room, Rachel, the senior coordinator, leaned against a glass partition and pointed a manicured finger in my direction. She did not bother lowering her voice. Look at the new girl, who wears thrift store cardigans to a corporate office. She looks like she just crawled out of a financial crisis. Marcus, the department director, chuckled and took a sip of his expensive coffee. Give her a break, Rachel. When you are pushing 40 and starting at the absolute bottom of the food chain, you cannot afford designer brands. Just make sure she inputs the inventory logs correctly. I need someone to do the grunt work. I kept my eyes on my monitor. My sweater was from a discount store. My shoes were scuffed. I had taken the public bus to work this morning. To Marcus and Rachel, I was just a desperate middle-aged woman clinging to a minimum wage job. They had no idea that I did not need this job. I did not need a paycheck from Apex Brands. I owned the entire company. 6 months ago, my investment firm, Sterling Holdings, quietly acquired Apex's failing billion-dollar parent corporation. Instead of cleaning house immediately, I needed to see exactly where the rot was coming from. That meant putting aside my tailored suits, stepping out of my penthouse, and becoming an invisible employee. The absolute best way to understand a toxic workplace is to experience it from the bottom. Marcus walked over, dropping a massive stack of disorganized files onto my keyboard. Welcome to the team, Diana. Digitize these by 5 o'clock. Do not mess up. I slowly offered a polite, quiet nod. The real work was just beginning. I was already looking for the major financial discrepancies today. By the noon, on my second day, the patterns became obvious. I sat quietly in my corner, matching Marcus's physical vendor invoices with the digital budget reports he had submitted last quarter. The numbers did not align. Apex Brands was overpaying its primary suppliers by nearly 20%, but the excess funds were not going to the vendors. They were being rerouted into third-party consulting accounts. Accounts that I strongly suspected belonged to Marcus and Rachel. I pressed a quick shortcut on my keyboard, quietly transferring a copy of the corrupted spreadsheet to my personal encrypted server. Are you staring at the screen or actually working? Rachel snapped, dropping another thick binder onto my desk. She leaned in, her strong perfume overwhelming the small space. We need this entire shipping catalog audited by tomorrow morning. If you cannot handle basic data entry, maybe you should find a job at a grocery store. Something more suited to your speed. I looked up at her, keeping my expression entirely neutral. I will have it finished by the end of the day, Rachel. Do not worry about me. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. Sure you will. Just remember we do not pay overtime for slow workers. As she walked away, I opened the binder. It was an intentionally disorganized mess, meant to confuse a junior clerk and force them into making careless errors. It was a classic tactic to create a scapegoat. They wanted my fingerprints on bad data. Instead of panicking, I ran the pages through the high-speed scanner, utilizing a custom macro script I had personally written years ago to sort and verify messy data. It took less than 2 hours to complete the impossible task. I did not tell them I was finished. I used the remaining hours to dig deeper into the third-party accounts. Every single arrogant remark they made only strengthened my growing case. I was going to expose them, but I needed absolute proof before making my move. A week passed in a blur of hostility and quiet observation. I arrived early, worked diligently, and ignored the constant stream of insults regarding my wardrobe and my age. Marcus called a mandatory department meeting on Friday afternoon. He stood at the front of the conference room, looking unusually tense. We have a slight problem, Marcus announced, pacing slowly. The quarterly logistics budget is showing a massive shortfall. Someone has been mismanaging our vendor allocations. He paused, letting his gaze drift intentionally toward my seat at the back of the room. Unfortunately, recent administrative errors by lower-level staff have complicated our financial records. We are currently trying to untangle the mess. The room grew entirely silent. Rachel smirked, crossing her arms as she looked directly at me. They were setting the stage. They needed the rest of the team to believe I was incompetent before the corporate audit occurred. "Diana," Marcus said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy, "I know you have been struggling to keep up, but I am giving you a very important task. I want you to compile the final expense presentation for the upcoming board audit. Use the adjusted figures Rachel gives you." I knew exactly what he was doing. He was going to submit the fraudulent numbers under my login credentials. When the corporate auditors eventually found the massive hole in the budget, the electronic trail would lead directly back to my computer. "I understand the assignment," I replied calmly, taking the flash drive Rachel aggressively shoved into my hand. "I will make sure the presentation reflects exactly what has been happening in this department." "See that you do," Marcus warned, completely missing the double meaning in my words. I returned to my desk silently, holding their carefully constructed lies in my palm. They truly thought I was just a naive woman who would blindly take their fall. They were making a massive, irreversible mistake that would cost them everything in the very near future. Working late in the empty office, I plugged Rachel's flash drive into my computer. The files were a masterclass in corporate deception. Expenses were inflated. Vendor names were slightly misspelled to bypass automated security checks, and entire shipments were marked as damaged to justify written-off losses. It was a sophisticated theft ring, but they had severely underestimated my expertise. As the founder of Sterling Holdings, I built my fortune analyzing failed companies. Finding hidden money and exposing corporate greed was always my ultimate specialty. I spent the next 3 hours systematically downloading their corrupted data. I created the exact presentation Marcus requested, formatting it flawlessly. It looked like the perfect admission of guilt from an incompetent junior employee. Then I opened a hidden encrypted folder on my desktop. I began building a second presentation. This one was entirely different. I pulled the authentic bank transfer records I had secured from the main corporate server. I tracked the IP addresses used to approve the fraudulent vendor payments. Every single unauthorized approval traced directly back to Marcus's private office network and Rachel's personal terminal. Once the shadow presentation was complete, I pulled out my personal phone and called my Chief Operations Officer, Sebastian. He answered on the first ring. "Good evening, Diana. Is the undercover corporate operation finally yielding the results you wanted, or do we need more time?" "More than I expected," I replied, watching the final data upload to my secure cloud. "The audit is coming entirely from middle management. I have all the proof we need. Prepare the executive board for a visit tomorrow morning. Marcus thinks he is presenting to standard auditors." "I understand. We will be there at 9 sharp, Sebastian said. I locked my screen, grabbed my cheap discount coat, and walked out into the cool night air. The trap was fully set, meticulously prepared without a single flaw. All I had to do now was quietly step back and let them walk blindly into it. The atmosphere in the office was suffocating the next morning. Marcus marched through the aisles aggressively, demanding status updates from everyone while adjusting his expensive silk tie. He wanted to project absolute confidence, but the sweat forming on his forehead betrayed his anxiety. Rachel practically vibrated with malicious energy. She stopped by my desk just before the meeting. "Listen closely, Diana," she whispered, leaning over my workspace. "The auditors are arriving soon. When Marcus puts your presentation on the main screen, he is going to call on you to explain the recent budget discrepancies. Do not stutter. Just tell them you made some mathematical errors during the transition phase. If you take responsibility, he might let you keep your minimum wage job." She smiled, assuming I was too terrified to protest. She truly believed her own manipulation was flawless. "I will explain everything perfectly," I replied, maintaining a steady, emotionless gaze. "I guarantee they will understand exactly how the money disappeared." Rachel patted my shoulder patronizingly. "Good girl, just follow the script." At 9 o'clock, the heavy glass doors of the department swung open. Sebastian, my chief operations officer, walked in alongside 3 of my most trusted financial executives. They wore immaculate suits and carried an aura of absolute authority. Marcus immediately rushed forward, pasting on a bright, welcoming smile. He did not realize these were not mid-level corporate drone auditors. These were the people who controlled the entire parent company. "Welcome, gentlemen," Marcus greeted loudly. "We are completely ready for you in the main conference room. I assure you Apex Brands is operating at peak efficiency." Sebastian simply nodded his eyes, scanning the room until they briefly locked onto mine. I gave him a microscopic nod of approval. The real show, completely directed by me, was finally about to officially begin. I gathered my plain notebook and quietly followed the group into the conference room. The moment I had been patiently waiting for since I first arrived was finally approaching. The conference room was cold, quiet, and filled with tension. Sebastian and the executive team sat at the long mahogany table, their expressions unreadable. Marcus stood at the front, holding a wireless remote. Rachel sat near the back, practically glowing with anticipation. I took a seat in the farthest corner, blending into the background. "Thank you for coming," Marcus began, his voice projecting artificial confidence. "We have prepared a comprehensive overview of our quarterly logistics budget. As you will see, we have identified a significant anomaly. Unfortunately, this issue stems from critical data entry failures." He pressed the remote and the first slide appeared. It displayed the fraudulent numbers Rachel had given me. A massive red deficit glared on the screen, representing millions of missing dollars. Marcus sighed dramatically. "We recently hired some new administrative staff to handle our core databases. It appears that one of our junior logistics clerks lacked the necessary qualifications for this demanding corporate environment. Her continuous errors have temporarily compromised our financial reporting." He pointed directly at me. The executives slowly turned their heads to look in my direction. "Diana," Marcus said, speaking to me like a disappointed parent, "please stand up and explain to the board how you managed to lose track of 20% of our total logistics budget. I told you to be careful, but these mistakes are entirely unacceptable." Rachel smirked, covering her mouth to hide a laugh. They were executing their plan flawlessly, throwing me completely under the bus. I stood up slowly, smoothing the fabric of my cheap cardigan. I did not look frightened or intimidated by his aggressive accusations. I looked directly into Marcus's eyes, and then I smiled for the first time since joining his department. "I would be very happy to explain the numbers," I said calmly. "However, I think we should look at the real presentation." I calmly reached down and pulled my personal smartphone from my pocket to begin the final process right now. Before Marcus could react, I tapped a command on my screen. The projector system beeped immediately, overriding his connection. His fraudulent slides vanished, replaced by my secondary presentation. The first slide did not show a deficit. It showed 2 private offshore bank accounts. "What are you doing?" Marcus snapped, his face flushing red. "Turn that off immediately. You are incredibly out of line, Diana. You are fired. Security, get her out of here." Sebastian raised his hand, silencing Marcus instantly. "Let her speak," Sebastian commanded, his tone dripping with cold authority. Marcus froze, looking confusedly at the auditor, who was suddenly defending a junior clerk. I stepped out from behind the table and walked directly to the front of the room. "The numbers Marcus just showed you were entirely fabricated," I explained, gesturing to the glowing screen. "The deficit does not exist because of administrative errors. It exists because Marcus and Rachel have been artificially inflating vendor invoices and diverting the surplus funds directly into these 2 offshore accounts." I pressed a button and the screen transitioned to display the exact IP addresses used to authorize the illegal payments. As you can see, every single fraudulent transfer was executed using Marcus's private office network and Rachel's personal terminal. They assumed they could blame the massive financial black hole on a naive new employee. They gave me the corrupted files and ordered me to organize them. Unfortunately for them, I actually understand how to read corporate data. Rachel stood up, her voice shaking with panic. "She is lying. She fabricated all of this. She is just a crazy, desperate woman trying to save her miserable job." I smiled, looking over at Sebastian. He pulled a thick folder from his briefcase and dropped it onto the table. "We already verified her findings this morning," Sebastian said calmly. The digital evidence provided is absolutely real and undeniable. Marcus slowly stepped backward, his entire body trembling as the terrible reality finally hit him hard. The heavy silence in the large corporate conference room was completely deafening. Marcus looked frantically between Sebastian and me, completely unable to process what was happening. His arrogant facade had entirely crumbled. "Verified," Marcus stammered, gripping the edge of the table to steady himself. "How could you verify anything? She is just a data entry clerk. She wears thrift store clothes and takes the public bus to work. You cannot seriously believe her over your own department, Director." Sebastian did not even blink. He calmly adjusted his expensive suit jacket and stood up. The other executives immediately followed his lead, standing in unison out of absolute respect. "Marcus," Sebastian said, his voice echoing in the quiet room, "you seem to be operating under a massive delusion. You think you are speaking to a desperate new hire. Allow me to properly introduce the woman standing before you." Sebastian gestured respectfully toward me. "This is Diana Sterling. She is the founder and majority shareholder of Sterling Holdings. 6 months ago, she personally purchased the parent company that owns Apex Brands. She is not your junior logistics clerk. She is the sole owner of this entire billion-dollar corporate empire." Rachel let out a sharp, choked gasp, stumbling backward until she hit the wall. The blood drained completely from Marcus's face. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He stared at my plain gray sweater and scuffed shoes, finally realizing the trap he had confidently walked into. "I told you I was an expert at finding hidden money," I said, walking slowly toward him. "When my firm acquired this struggling company, I needed to see exactly how the management treated its weakest employees. I wanted to see who was bleeding my investment dry. You made it incredibly easy for me, Marcus." He frantically shook his head, pure panic setting in, as the severe consequences of his arrogant actions finally became clear. He had mocked the only person who held his future forever now. "Ms. Sterling, please." Marcus begged, his arrogant posture completely gone. He looked pitiful, practically shrinking under the harsh fluorescent lights. "This was all a terrible misunderstanding. I have given 5 years of my life to Apex Brands. I can fix this. I can repay the missing money. Just give me a chance to explain." "There is absolutely nothing left to explain," I replied, crossing my arms. "Your own data tells the entire story. You abused your power, stole from the company, and attempted to ruin an innocent employee's life to cover your tracks." Rachel frantically stepped forward, pointing a trembling finger at Marcus. "It was his idea, Diana. I swear to you I did not want to do it. Marcus forced me to manipulate the accounts. I was just following his orders to protect my job. You have to believe me." Marcus looked at her in absolute disbelief. "You greedy liar. You set up the offshore accounts." I raised my hand, instantly stopping their pathetic argument. "I do not care whose idea it was first," I stated firmly. "You are both equally guilty, and you are both entirely finished here. Marcus, Rachel, you are officially terminated, effective immediately." Sebastian motioned to the hallway, and 2 large corporate security guards immediately stepped into the room. "Escort them to their desks," I ordered the guards. "They are allowed to take their personal coats and nothing else. Every digital file, physical document, and company asset belongs to Sterling Holdings. An independent forensic accounting team will be auditing your entire 5-year history starting today." "You cannot do this to me," Marcus yelled as a guard grabbed his arm. "I own this company," I replied coldly, staring him down until he finally looked away. "I can do exactly this. Now get out of my building." The silent executives watched as the corporate security guards aggressively pulled the 2 disgraced managers completely out of the room, dragging them directly through the heavy glass doors forever today. The department was perfectly quiet when I walked back out. Every employee was standing by their desks, having witnessed the dramatic exit. They looked at me with a mixture of absolute shock, deep relief, and lingering fear. I stood looking at the people who suffered under Marcus's toxic leadership. "You do not need to worry about your jobs," I announced clearly, making sure my voice reached the back corners of the room. "The corruption in this department ended today. From now on, Apex Brands will operate with total transparency. We are going to restructure this entire division, starting with fair wages, realistic workloads, and respectful management. If you are willing to work hard, Sterling Holdings will take excellent care of you. A collective breath of relief swept through the room. Some people even genuinely smiled for the first time in months. Sebastian approached me, handing me a digital tablet containing the new executive assignments. The transition team is ready to take over the management duties, he quietly informed me. Do you want your driver to bring your car around? Your actual office is waiting upstairs. I looked down at my plain gray sweater, then at the cramped little desk I had occupied for the past week. No, tell the team to hold off for a few more days, I replied, handing the tablet back. I want to personally oversee the logistics restructuring down here before I go back to the penthouse. There is still a lot of real honest work to be completely finished first. I calmly walked straight back to my small desk, sat down, and opened a new spreadsheet. They had mocked the poor new girl for starting at the bottom, but they failed to understand one simple truth. To truly build a billion-dollar empire, you must always know exactly what holds the foundation together. I plan to rebuild this company from the ground up, ensuring that true integrity would always remain my most powerful asset moving forward.